Morning, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. In my former life, I taught total quality, which involves root cause analyzing problems to assign them documented corrective action. One of the great problems today, well, it's one of naivety. People assume that there are simplistic solutions to multivariate complex problems, when no such solutions exist. They assume that because thinking is too much of a burden for them. One of the reasons that I host this channel is that I offer people insights by doing the research for myself, it's verified, and invite you to follow along with me in the logic that I use to examine where we're going wrong and why, and what can be done to correct it. I'm not a nihilist. My channel is dedicated to using Christian ethics, epistemology, and ontology, and the historical perspective of the Christian West and its freedoms, which are legal and tradition, to examine what can be done to correct this globalist world. So, the title of today's video is "We Cannot Go On Like This." The subtitle, "Canada in a Globalist World." Let us examine where we are at present, where we are headed, and what to do to create a brighter future. The idea of a coordinated global effort to centralize, control, and reduce national borders is a topic that comes up often in discussions about globalization, geopolitics, and international government. So let's break it down. What drives global integration? There are several real-world forces that contribute to the perception or reality of increasing global coordination. Number one, economic globalization. Trade agreements, multinational corporations, and global supply chains have made economies more interconnected. Organizations like the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund promote standardized rules to control global governance. Yes, control, and yet more centralized, undemocratic control from the know-it-alls abroad who literally detest economic freedom and nation-state autonomy. Point two, technological integration. The internet, satellite communications, and digital platforms have made borders less relevant in terms of information flow and business. Tech giants operate across borders, influencing global culture and policy. Three, supranational institutions. Entities like the European Union, the United Nations, and the World Health Organization aim to coordinate policy across nations, especially on issues like perceived man-made climate change, health, and security. Four, do global challenges require global solutions, or are said solutions creating the very problem they claim to solve? Climate change catastrophizing, man-made pandemics such as the Wuhan lab leak, religious fundamentalist terrorism, and financial crises resulting from central planning are the result of coordinated international responses from those who are robbing us of our autonomy and economic prosperity. Yet the unelected do-gooders who claim to be experts on global matters continually insist that we need more of their endless meddling. So what are the concerns about centralized control? Some people worry that this trend would lead to a loss of national sovereignty, which it has, overreach by unelected global bodies, which it has, cultural homogenization, which has utterly failed because multiculturalism, well, it's completely contradictory to human nature. I live in a neighborhood heavily integrated neighborhood where the one thing that isn't homogeneous is the nature of the culture of this neighborhood. And of course, reduced democratic accountability. These concerns are often voiced by critics of globalization, critics like myself, that argue that local communities and nations should retain more control over their laws, economies, and culture. So the question, is it a coordinated effort? Where there are coordinated or collaborative initiatives, most experts agree that it's not a single secretive plan, but rather a complex mix of interests, including governments seeking stability and growth, corporations seeking markets and efficiency, activists and NGOs pushing for global justice or sustainability, and technological evolution making global coordination more feasible. This raises a deeply important concern, one that touches on identity, autonomy, and the preservation of culture in a rapidly globalizing world where there is no universal set of laws and no universal religious and cultural norms. Why then should we surrender ourselves to a network of neo-Marxist social engineers who think that they can recreate mankind in their dystopian image? Next point. There is no universal set of values or laws. Human societies are incredibly diverse. What's considered just, moral, or sacred in one culture may be viewed very differently in another. That's why attempts to centralize governance or values globally is felt to be threatening, especially when they seem to override local traditions, beliefs, or democratic processes. So here's a few key points to consider. 1. No universal morality or legal system. Legal systems vary widely. Common law, civil law, religious law, and tribal law. Values like freedom, equality, or community are prioritized differently across cultures. Attempts to impose a single framework has often led to resistance, conflict, or cultural erosion, which is why you see Great Britain right now falling into chaos, and France too. And it's likely to happen here. 2. Global governance versus local sovereignty. Institutions like the UN, or WHO, aim to coordinate responses to global issues, but they are often criticized for being bureaucratic, unaccountable, or biased. Some fear that global governance could become a tool for powerful nations or corporations to dominate weaker ones. 3. Cultural collapse or cultural evolution? That's the question. Globalization can lead to homogenization where dominant cultural ideologies like Fabian neo-Marxism overshadow others. Languages, traditions, and local customs can be lost or diluted. Though many assert today that this can lead to hybrid cultures, new ideas, and shared innovations, there is also overwhelming evidence that this attempt to engineer humanity is leading to socio-economic ruin, cultural clashes, and massive civil unrest. This is particularly true if indigenous populations are being replaced by a religious culture that worships violence and power as its primary means of proselytizing converts to Islamic terror. 4. Why people feel threatened. Many feel that their way of life is under attack, whether through immigration policies, digital censorship, or international treaties. There's a growing sense that decisions are being made far away by people who don't understand or care about local realities. Is this intentional? Some argue that this is a deliberate strategy to centralize power, control populations, and eliminate dissent. The completion of the trial of Chris Barber and Tamara Leach is proof. We had political prisoners here in Canada who protested peacefully with very legitimate concerns. Others see it as a natural consequence of technological and economic integration. Either way, the lack of transparency and accountability fuels mistrust. Let's dive deeper. What is Canada's role in globalization? Canada is deeply integrated into global systems. Trade, member of the WTO, the USMCA, the CTPP, or the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Climate policy, committed to UN climate goals and carbon pricing. Digital governance, participates in global tech regulation discussions. Migration and refugees, follows UN framework and has a multicultural immigration policy. It is claimed that these connections bring benefits like economic growth and international influence, but have resulted in losing control over domestic policies accompanied by the hideous impact of unvetted and unrestrained immigration. Next point. Cultural sovereignty at risk? Canada's identity has been shaped by Indigenous cultures, French and English cultures, and multicultural immigration. Global media, corporate influence, and international norms can dilute or override these identities. For example, streaming platforms dominate Canadian media, often sidelining local content. In fact, this channel is hardly, I understand this, but it's hardly watched by anyone. I have, 296 subscribers? And I don't think many of you watch the videos through to their end or read the blog in its entirety because you're looking for simplistic solutions to multivariate complex problems that don't exist. International education standards may conflict with Indigenous knowledge systems. Global tech companies influence speech, privacy, and even elections. Resistance and protection efforts. Canada has taken steps to protect its cultural and political autonomy, so it claims, which translates into the Canadian government creating inventive ways to gag Canadians, and the fact that they are fed up with the government's postmodern cultural relativist agenda. Bill C-11 regulates online streaming to promote Canadian content, but instead has created more authoritarian control over freedom of speech and the free market of ideas. Digital Charter aims to safeguard privacy and data sovereignty, but fails to do either. Support for Indigenous self-governance. This is still a work in progress since the Canadian government has no idea how to address First Nations needs. In fact, even the use of the word nations in this context fails to recognize that tribal North Americans did not view themselves as nations. Rather, they were tribes who were often in conflict with one another. That is not to devalue their importance. They managed to survive in this brutal climate, in a very harsh environment, and have much to tell us about the importance of their culture and their laws and understanding of how nature operates. It's fascinating. I was adopted by the Anishinaabe into the Cape Croker band and got to light the sacred fire. I was named. So I'm deeply interested in First Nations identity and culture, but we're doing a terrible job of dealing with their many and diverse needs because there are many, many different tribes in North America. So I invite you all to explore specific issues by diving deeper into how Canadian laws are being influenced by global treaties, the impact of global tech on Canadian culture, how Indigenous sovereignty fits into the so-called global landscape, and how citizens can push back on the global agenda to preserve local values. There is a growing movement, especially in Canada, aimed at reviving English common law and reclaiming individual liberties, often in response to perceived government overreach. So here's a deeper look at what this movement would entail. What is English common law? English common law is a legal system based on judicial precedent rather than codified statutes. It emphasizes individual rights and freedoms. Judicial decisions as the primary source of law and natural justice and equity. In Canada, common law remains the foundation of civil law outside of Quebec, though it is often overshadowed by statutory laws and regulatory frameworks. Why the push to restore it? I asked next. Many Canadians are turning back to common law and natural rights due to distrust in government institutions. Now listen to this. Only 24% of Canadians can trust their government to do what is right. Only 24%. That's less than a quarter of the population. That's terrifying. Concerns over transparency, redacted contracts with pharmaceutical companies, and scandals like the We Charity and SNC-Lavalin have fueled skepticism. Response to COVID-19 policies. The use of the Emergency Act in 2022 to end peaceful protests raised alarms about civil liberties. Next subtitle, The Sovereignty Movement. This grassroots revival includes reclaiming legal identity. Some Canadians are learning how to stand as living men and women under natural law, separate from corporate state structures, private trusts, and declarations. These legal tools are used to assert autonomy, though they are not recognized by the courts. Educational efforts, seminars, podcasts, vlogcasts like this one, and Telegram groups are spreading knowledge about common law, equity, and lawful remedy. Next subtitle, Philosophical Roots. Thinkers like William Blackstone, David Hume, and Adam Smith emphasize the role of common law in protecting liberty. Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England remain a cornerstone of legal philosophy, advocating for the rule of law and the rights of individuals. Next subtitle, Challenges Ahead. Legal recognition. Sovereign declarations and natural law claims are not accepted in Canadian courts. Public understanding. Many people conflate common law with fringe legal theories, which can undermine legitimate reform efforts. I read this nonsense all the time. Political will. Restoring common law principles would require significant legislative and judicial shifts. So let us explore how we could draft a modern Charter of Liberties rooted in common law principles by looking into historical models like Magna Carta or the English Bill of Rights. To restore English common law and individual liberties, we need to draft a modern charter inspired by the Magna Carta, one that reasserts national rights, limits government power, and reclaims judicial independence, which is a major problem today. Our courts are under the influence of the executive branch of government, which in the Westminster parliamentary system, this is a no-no. So here's a blueprint for the Charter. What's it look like? Foundations, Magna Carta is a model. The Magna Carta of 2015 was revolutionary because it declared the sovereign subject to the rule of law, protected free men from unlawful imprisonment, introduced the right to swift justice and habeas corpus. We just saw the longest mischief trial in all of Canadian history. This absolutely breaks precedent with every single principle upon which our legal system was founded. Our courts should be ashamed of themselves. But, you know, my wife's people have a saying, "Der forschent os niet sei nor nase aborta." It's too late to blow your nose when your nose is gone. These people have bitten off the head of shame. They're incapable of shame or incapable of admitting that they're guilty. So only a few clauses remain today, but it's of Magna Carta, but its spirit lives on, particularly in the U.S. Constitution, in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and common law traditions. Next subtitle, Key Pillars of a Modern Charter. A revived charter could include, number 1, Natural Rights Clause, affirms that rights are inherent, not granted by the state. God has made you free. Includes freedom of speech, conscience, movement, and bodily autonomy. No one can force you to take drugs or have injections that you do not wish to have. And no one can punish you for not having them. 2. Due process and habeas corpus guarantees fair trial, the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, and protection from arbitrary detention. Again, we've saw all of this with Tamara and Chris. It's ridiculous. It's shameful. Every Canadian should be horrified at what just took place over these several years since 2022. And it doesn't seem like we've learned anything. Number 3, sovereignty of the individual. Recognizes individuals as autonomous beings, not corporate entities. Protects against compelled contracts or state-imposed identity. 4, limits on government power. Requires transparency in lawmaking and spending. Prohibits emergency powers that override constitutional rights. Judicial independence. Courts must operate free from political influence, which they certainly aren't doing today. Judges accountable to the law, not to some ridiculous postmodern neo-Marxist ideology. 6, right to redress. Citizens can challenge unlawful acts by the state. Establishes a tribunal for peaceful remedy and restitution. Implementation strategy, beginning with grassroots education, which is why I host this podcast. Teach common law principles in communities. Legal activism, use existing courts to assert rights under natural law. Charter drafting, collaborate with legal scholars to write a binding document. Public declaration, encourage individuals to sign and adopt the charter as a personal and communal covenant. Subtitle, Vision for the Future. This isn't just legal reform, it's a cultural shift. It would mean replacing fear with lawful confidence, reclaiming the dignity of being a free man or woman, building a society where law serves liberty, not control. From the book of Proverbs, out of the King James Version of the Bible, chapter 29, verse 1. He who is often rebuked and hardens his neck will suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. Verse 2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when a wicked man rules, the people groan. 3. Whoever loves wisdom makes his father rejoice, but a companion of harlots wastes his wealth. 4. The king establishes the land by justice, but he who receives bribes overthrows it. Globalists may not be one unified body, but they do share one thing in common. They are self-appointed plutocrats who loathe Western culture and its values. They also detest Christianity and its moral precepts. We must dare to restore English common law and our Christian legal heritage while rejecting their neo-Marxist belief system. It is a pseudo-religion based upon fear-mongering and authoritarian, undemocratic foreign meddling. This is especially true for Canada, since our Prime Minister was a former governor of the Bank of England. His tenure there was disastrous for the British economy. As revealed in his book, literally entitled Values, we are provided with substantive proof that he is fully on board with the entire globalist agenda. Moreover, Carney himself has personally benefited financially from this association. Therefore, my final point, we must reclaim our national autonomy under God if our culture is both to survive as well as thrive. These are things to think and pray about on this October the 10th. God bless you all. Please leave your comments. Share this video with your family and friends. God bless you.